In 1947, the price of a barrel of crude oil was $18. In 2003, oil averaged $33 a barrel. 4 years later, $72. Over the past year, the price of oil has doubled, sending gas prices soaring, slowing economic growth and stirring up frenzied debate on Capitol Hill. With U.S. oil imports at near record levels, high oil prices could cost Americans close to $500 billion in 2008, more than half of the total U.S. trade deficit, and more than double the 2008 cost of the war on terror. From Main Street to Wall Street to Washington, D.C., all have been asking the same questions. What is happening? Why are prices rising? Will they come down? And how should we respond as a nation? Given these high prices, what happens if there is a violent shock to the system, a supply shock that results in a sustained interruption in the flow of oil into the world's energy markets? Can the world economy continue to function with $200 oil? How would we survive an oil shockwave?
2008 was not just a turning point. It was a break point, it's a transformation point. All the things we thought would never happen actually happened. The price of oil hit $140, it weakened a little bit, but still twice what we thought it would be at this point in time. Food prices went through the roof. It's the beginning. All the things we feared would happen is all coming into play.
So we are really facing a perfect storm when it comes to oil prices, and sadly it looks like this is a storm that's going to continue for some time.
Everybody's life is going to change in some way because of this. This hits home very quickly for the average American.
So I think that people are increasingly aware that things are bad, that they might get worse, and that they have real consequences.
Until the early part of 2008, when one looked at the price of oil, it moved, from 30 to 75, towards $100 in the early part of 2008. And the world economy did not slow down. Demand for oil did not slow down on a global basis. You move into the springtime, the price is 140, moving around 120 to 140 through the summer. The economy is beginning to slow down. The impact is becoming significant, not on all countries, not on all consumers. But you look at the United States, that now means $4 a gallon for gasoline. Now that is significant. That is a major hit on the average American's wage packet earnings. They had to change their lifestyle to some degree and forego many things they want to do otherwise. That affects major industries in the United States. Before, it had an impact, but breaking through the $120 threshold made a remarkable difference.
So why are oil prices so high? What has caused them to double in the last 12 months?
There are several reasons why oil prices are high, and most people attribute it to the unbelievable growing demand in the world, mostly from India and China and other developing countries.
How did we get here? Well, it's simple now, but it wasn't simple before it happened. There was a country called China that caught us by complete surprise. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, China hardly used any oil at all. I mean, literally hardly any oil at all. But for 20 years, this country was growing at 7%, 8% a year economic growth, and energy demand and oil demand was growing at 10% plus during that period. Well, after 20 years, all of a sudden, there's a big bang, and China is now a major consumer of oil and of everything else on the planet as well.
Between now and, let's say, 2030, the global demand for energy is probably going to increase by 50+%, and that's a huge, huge number.
But on top of that, we've seen a flat, and in some cases, a declining supply growth. So at this one time you have this unprecedented demand growth and we see a demand shock, you also have a flat to somewhat declining supply response.
Look at the other side of the equation, supply. In the past, whenever the world was pushing up on demand against supply, the world would turn to Saudi Arabia. They used to be called the marginal supplier. They supplied the marginal barrel. They're always there. There are other countries too, but usually Saudi Arabia. What's the incentive? Right now you're getting $140 a barrel, $120 a barrel. That's a lot of money. Whether you produce more or produce less, you're still making more money. In a funny sort of way, by producing less, you make more. But can they produce more? What's the time frame for producing more? Now the new reality is, because of the lack of access to these resources, which are controlled by state-owned companies in countries like Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in Russia, in Venezuela, in Mexico, it puts a fear in the market's mind. Look to the future. They're going to become more nationalistic about their resources. Our companies won't have access the way we think we'd like them to have access. Who's going to get the marginal barrel? Who's going to produce it, and where will it go? The market's now saying, with some fear, we know we can produce some more oil, but who's going to get it? Therefore, I'm willing to pay more now because it's going to be a lot more expensive in the future. Finally, you've got unbelievable political instability in the world, and instability in many of the major oil producers. We're talking about a tension with Iran, we're talking about violence in Nigeria, we're talking about the government in Russia getting involved in the oil industry, we're talking about Mexico and the government trying to manage the oil industry, and Venezuela. And so you bring these things together and you have a very uncertain market. And I think that is what is driving up the oil price, and why oil traders and others really don't know where to settle on the price. And you can see dramatic swings like we've never seen before.
But increasing demand, supply problems, and political instability are not the only things that worry experts.
We've gotten to $140 oil without a significant supply disruption. We've had many concerns. Not many, but many concerns. Nigeria, the rebels in the Delta disrupting production of oil in Nigeria, some incidents in other countries, concerns about Iran and the issues of the nuclear situation in Iran, which caused the market to be concerned, but nothing's happened there yet. We have Iraq, which took place and is happening and still happens, which causes concerns about availability of oil, but no major incident. We have $140 oil. What if something really did happen?
But when one throws in there an actual shock, a shock to the system that is political in nature, whether it be something happens with Iran, whether it be something happens with Venezuela, or something happens in the Middle East, one can only imagine where the prices can go. And so the real concern is, if we're at this price now, with very little driving it except the fundamentals of supply and demand, if you then add on something that's a political consequence, we are in a shock that I don't think anyone had ever anticipated. And so what we decided to do was bring former cabinet members to the table, create as realistic a stage and news stories with a real possible events, and then have them respond.
And so, a war game. A crisis simulation was crafted, Oil Shockwave, carefully based on possible real-world events, to try to understand how we would or even could react if the oil we depend on, the oil we must have, is not there. A situation room is created and a cabinet is assembled. The cabinet will include the former Secretary of the Treasury, the former head of the EPA, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, the former head of U.S. Central Command, the former Secretary of the Navy, and advisors and experts from the highest levels of politics, economics, foreign affairs, and national security. Their mission? To advise a nation in the throes of an energy crisis, as global events send the price of oil soaring. The simulation begins with news of an attack on the BTC pipeline in Azerbaijan, a critical artery in the world's complex oil infrastructure.
Well, let me start by thanking all of you for being here. The President, as you know, is going to make a press statement about what's going on in the Caspian, and he would like us to advise him as to how he should talk about all of this. There are a lot of issues here about, is this oil price increase a spike, or is it something like to be sustained? What effects is it likely to have on the economy?
The first thing the cabinet tries to get a handle on is who is responsible for the attack. And more importantly, is another one coming?
Our people have tried to study all the available information. We have more suspects here than an Agatha Christie novel. We're very worried about possible motives on the part of the Armenians. For the Russians, anything that breaks this pipeline would be the most important strategic move in the international political economy for them, maybe of the decade. If this pipeline goes down, everything pretty much has to go through Russia or Iran, and then the Iranians don't like the pipeline much either because it keeps these countries from having to go through them as much.
Can I ask the National Intelligence Director if we've got any indications that terrorists might try to take advantage of this in other locations to further exacerbate this situation in their goal of bringing us and others down?
There are a lot of general indications that terrorist groups are looking for opportunities to attack oil infrastructure, like, of course, the big attack that occurred a couple of years ago on the Abqaiq complex in Saudi Arabia.
Is there a military, is there anything that we should be thinking about in a military sense, Secretary?
The President needs to understand our ability to project power into this area is very limited.
Meanwhile, as the price of oil continues to rise, the group looks for other ways to deal with the crisis. How much spare oil is there in the system? How much spare capacity is in the marketplace?